Hello and welcome to today's webinar on interfaces between content repositories and I call it the SDL translation world, meaning all the different SDL translation tools such as Studio, GroupShare, World Server, etc. My name is Klaus Fleischmann. I'm CEO of Kaleidoscope, and I will guide you through today's webinar. And I will actually start with a few housekeeping items. We're all very experienced webinar listeners by now, working from home. So as you will probably know, you're all placed on mute and you can ask questions using the Q&A function. Unfortunately, if you raise your hand or something like that, I will not be able to see that because I'm the only one in the webinar. I don't have a moderator who is normally tracking these things. So don't worry if you lose audio, just log out and back in. And of course, we'll have some time to answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. And of course, you will also receive this recording and all the other supporting documents for this webinar and the information automatically after this webinar. Who is Kaleidoscope? Our claim to fame is taking your content global. So we work with you on organizing your content, structuring your content, and making it multilingual. To be more precise, we have 4 pillars of our portfolio. Number 1 is translation, where of course we offer traditional language services, process management. We also offer machine translation, hosted, serviced, etc. We offer global SEO, global SEO, that would be nice. We offer global SEO services, search engine optimization in all languages, cultures, etc., and a lot of other managed services. Another big pillar in our portfolio is terminology, and there are plenty of webinars about that as well, where we help particularly enterprises design a terminology structure, database, system, processes, etc., build awareness inside the company together, terminology verification, checking, and of course also integrating it into tools that are used in your organization. Quality management as a service, and of course with tools again, based very strongly on DQF content profiling. We offer review as a service and try to help you raise language quality management to a strategic level, collaborating with all the stakeholders such as in-country reviewers, for example. And last but not least, the focus of today's webinar, content and connectivity. So on the one hand side, we help you modularize and digitize your content, automate the creation and composition of documents based on content fragments, etc., using component-based content management systems, but then also the data exchange, in particular between the content repositories or content creation processes and the localization processes. So we offer all kinds of connectors and also, of course, the implementation of the standards Kodi and TAPIC that exist. We offer all of this either as a solution, meaning you can purchase it and implement it in-house, or as a managed service, meaning you outsource everything to us, including hosting of the software and managing and maintaining the software, but also running the processes for you, or any mixture of these two. In terms of products on the translation side, our daughter company Eurocom is Austria's largest translation service provider, very experienced, and of course we would love to help you translate your content as well, or some of it. On the software side, we are a very strong and long-standing, almost 25-year-long partner of SDL, implementing their software, and also SDL is, of course, reselling our software in the rest of the world. So that's a very fruitful and beneficial relationship. Terminology-wise, again, we partner with companies such as SDL, but also Congri, Acrolinx, other companies in the terminology sphere, and we have our own products. Our own products are always on the top in these boxes, so QuickTerm and CheckTerm are really our flagship products when it comes to enterprise terminology management, verification, checking, etc. Quality management, we have a translator query management system, which of course is very essential to translation quality. And with global review, we have what I mentioned already, a quality evaluation, in-country review, sampling, etc. Review for strategic quality management. And last but not least, on the content side, of course, we have connecting content, what will be in the focus today, our middleware that automates the processes between the content repositories and the way you connect them with your SDL language software or installation or whatever you might have. We also, as I mentioned, offer component-based content management systems. There we partner with a company called Schema, and with Xilio, we partner when it comes to the CMS connectors. So with Xelio Lookup, we have connectors into WordPress and Sitecore and Adobe Experience Manager, etc., etc. So that was a little bit about what we do and where we come from. What am I going to talk about today? First, of course, what is the challenge? Why are we even talking about integration and automation? Then some of the solutions. How can you address this problem? Showing you lots of examples and demos around what this can look like. And then in the end, I will also talk a little bit about standards, because this is something that is very dear to my heart and very close to my heart, to promote standards in exactly this exchange of data in the translation supply chain. So what's the challenge? The challenge is, of course, the speed and just the increasing number of projects that we have in our industry. SDL ran a survey last year or this year, I'm not sure anymore, and they say about 50% of all their projects are what we call small projects, minimum charge projects normally. So yeah, not fun projects, simply because there's a lot of overhead in managing these projects as opposed to the actual translation work itself. How did that happen? Well, it happened a little bit through the introduction of content management systems that work on a modular basis. They write fragments, and basically every hour you can send fragments of content into localization. So we basically moved away from the waterfall model, similar as in software localization, or sorry, in software development. We moved away from this waterfall model where you would wait for, I don't know, a 500-page manual to finally be done, and then you throw it over the wall. Nowadays, it's more the droplet model, where basically you have continuous localization. Whenever a fragment is done, you send it out into localization. And of course, what that means is that the number of individual projects increase, and these individual projects are smaller. So in proportion, the transaction costs increase as opposed to the actual physical translation cost. So with this, getting your transaction costs down has just become proportionally more important than it used to be, when all you had to do is throw one 500-page project over the wall. The other thing that has changed is simply the expectations of today's consumers, and thus the time to market that is expected from digital marketing, digital transformation, and content being the currency of digital transformation, simply has accelerated the speed that is required or expected from the localization process. So very often we have 24-hour turnarounds, 48 hours. That's not rare. We have customers that have like a three-hour turnaround time for content, because simply the expectation of the user is, I don't want to wait for my localized version. Once the English is out, I want everything else to be out. And of course, that means customers don't want to wait 48 hours to produce their information, but it has to just go a lot faster. So the consequence is we need to try to automate as much as possible, both in the content management and on the translation management side. And we need the data to just be provided to the localization process automatically, flow through the process automatically, be delivered back to the content management system automatically. And the new paradigm is called management by exception. So as long as everything flows correctly, there is no management, it just happens automatically. That's the idea, at least. But if something goes wrong, then you have to go in there and see what went wrong and fix it. So what that means is everybody's looking for ways to automate that, get the data to talk to each other, no conversion, of course, no copy paste, things like that. So automated interfaces and automated workflows. What does that mean? Well, if we need an interface between a CMS and the translation management system, first of all, we need this interface to be able to select and transfer the translatable content. So we need to figure out what needs to be translated in the CMS, how do we get it out, how do we get it back in, and ideally in logical work packages, so you don't get one huge XML file that contains the entire website, or you get 300,000 XML files that contain one sentence each. That doesn't make sense. We want logical work packages so the translators understand what they're working on. We also need contextual information, so we need to know, what is this? Is this an ad? Is this a product explanation? Is this a headline? Is this a table? We need some contextual information so we know, both linguistically and from a formatting point of view, what is it that we are translating here? Because of course, since we're translating fragments, that is getting more and more difficult. And we also need business metadata. As simple as that might sound, that's not always so easy to figure out what language is this content actually in, what language do you want it back, by when do you want it back, What workflow would you like to use for this? Is raw machine translation enough? Do you need transcreation? What's the workflow requirement here? And for that, we also need content profiles so that we can automate that, and we know the expectation of the translation for that particular piece of content. There's different types of interfaces when we look at interfaces. So on the one hand side, we have push interfaces. That means we have one system that pushes data to the next, and then that system does something with it. So for example, a push interface would be if an author exports content from a content management system, let's say Typo3 or WordPress or something like that, and puts it somewhere. And then we can automate that. So connecting content, for example, can monitor a folder and say, oops, there's a new XML file or new whatever content to be localized. I know what to do with it, or I can read that from the XML file itself. I can push it to the respective translators, give them the deadline, and when it's done, connecting content can push it back to the source system. There's also pull systems. So basically that means that system B monitors system A, and when something happens there and it gets triggered by something, it pulls the data. So for example, you could have a connector that pulls data from a content management system. Let's say if you're always translating your blog in 10 languages, you can automate that, and you can have connecting content or a connector see, there's a new blog, it has been released for translation, let's say, if the status is set to that, and then it knows, okay, this is in this folder, for example, in the content management system, so I know I can pull it, I can send it into translation, I know the languages, it's all configured, and I can push it back once it's done back to the content management system. So this is typically you can typically automate that with rules. We can detect changes, we can have webhooks in the CMS that can basically trigger system B to say, here's something to localize, please go get it. And in reality, when we talk about interfaces and automation, it's always a little bit of a mixture of these two. So it could be, for example, that to go into localization, there's a pull interface, but when it goes back, there's a push interface, or the other way around. So really, the world is not black and white, as you can see on the right-hand side, but it's always like a lot of different shades. So let's look at some examples. I have an example for a push interface here, a hot folder integration with connecting content. So what we have here is essentially we have Studio, and I'm using Studio because it's easy to demo. And I have a folder here that connecting content is monitoring. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a doc file in there. Connecting content knows what to do. It knows what languages to translate that into, and it automatically creates a Studio project in this case. You saw that the project appeared here. It's just a completely normal Studio project. This, of course, is fairly simple. It could be a group share project, etc. But let's look at what we configured here. So this now is connecting content, and connecting content works with jobs. So here we have a job that says create a project when a file arrives in this input folder here. And we also tell it what input files can you expect there. So for example, we say, well, if somebody throws a doc file in there, then that's allowed. And then we tell it exactly what to do. And if you know Studio, you will understand what we're doing here. So we're creating a Studio project with particular file name. In this case, we just project name, sorry. In this case, we just use the file name as a project name. Then we scan it to find out how to convert it. We copy it to the target languages. We run the analysis with all the options that you are familiar with from the Studio wizard. We then pre-translate it with a minimum match value, for example. In this case, 0 doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's just for the demo. And then we open the project, which of course normally you don't do, but for the demo it's fun. Here's a different example. So this is more complex. This is an XML file. So for example, the XML file might contain information about the project, such as due date, description, languages, etc. So of course, we need to teach connecting content where to find that info. And we do that with a parser here in our input tab. So we can say, okay, I have an XML file that I'm expecting here, and I can tell it what's the root node, similar as in the file types. Where do you find your project name? Where do you find your languages? Where do you find your due dates, etc.? A lot of stuff that we can pull from the XML file and then do things like selecting a different workflow or just passing that information on to Studio. So again, just with the Studio example, I'm going to throw this sample XML file in this folder now and just wait a little bit, and then bang. Again, for the demo, we just create a Studio project. here it is. So we have our sample XML file. The project name, of course, was read from the XML file. It was sample project. The description was put in there. The deadline is in there. So everything was read correctly from the XML file. So this is very simple what you can do. The question, of course, also is, well, what happens when the project is done? The way Connecting Content handles that is by being able to set up finalization tasks. So here, for example, I just update the TM and I put the target translation somewhere, and then I delete the project. So that's what we do here. We can add other stuff to the automation, so we can automate a lot of other things. On the one hand side, of course, studio tasks. So for example, we can create a translation package and put that on an FTP server maybe, again, with all the options that you know from that particular batch task in Studio, and automatically deliver that to the translator. We can also do completely different things here, like, for example, upload the project to group share server. So if you work with group share, then you will understand this. So we can tell it which organization do we want the project to be stored in. I can automatically assign people to different phases. So I can say, well, my translator here is a really cool translator. He can translate any language into any other language. And then basically we run, when we run this task, we then automatically create the group share project. Also in the finalization, we can do other stuff like exporting files somewhere else. So let's assume you want to put this on an FTP server, for example, so that the content management system can read it back. Then that's how you can set it up. So you can say, okay, what should happen after the project has been completed. We can also do things like running a script. So we could, for example, send a request to the content management system and say, the translation is finished, please import it now. We can do a lot more sophisticated stuff. So for example, we can use queuing. So if you don't want to send out the micro project every time it arrives, but you want to bundle them, let's say, into bigger projects, you can say, well, collect them all and only send them out on Monday at 7 o'clock, unless, of course, a certain queuing condition is met before that. So for instance, if the analysis says, well, all these little snippets have now reached 500 words, or a certain condition is in the XML file, then trigger the project and don't wait until Monday 7 o'clock. So this is interesting, again, if you have this droplet model. What we can also do is we can make things available on our web form. So you can trigger these projects not only through an API call or through putting a file somewhere, but you can actually upload files through a web form. So this is a very simple way, for example, that you can just give your users access to the translation system. And it works the same way. So once you click on Submit Project here, it gets passed over to Connecting Content. It's created in group share there or whatever you have configured. And when it's done, it will show here as I am done. The file is put in a hot folder or it is sent out by email, or you can actually also download the translation here from this web form. So you can see lots of studio things that we can automate, group share things. I didn't show world server here, but we can also automate world server and generate a project based on a certain project type. And we can automate things around. So we have these scripting functionalities that we can do. We can start or trigger completely external tasks. I don't know, something like creating a PDF preview or getting picture files from some FTP folder and including it as reference files. Everything you can somehow script, you can automate in the process. So it's a really powerful tool to automate processes and standardize processes. Another example, which is a little bit different, the push-pull interface. So what I have prepared here is a small WordPress site. Actually looks like this. So we're gonna translate this from German into English. We're gonna use Xilio's lockhub for that. So we're gonna use the Xilio pull connector to pull content from WordPress into Xilio. And then we're gonna use a plugin that Kaleidoscope has built for Studio that basically uses the TAPIC protocol. I will talk a little bit later about what TAPIC actually is. It's a standard, an open source standard promoted by Gala and implemented by Xilio into their lockhub. So basically from within Studio, you can connect to a TAPIC host that has projects for localization. get that project, translate it in Studio, and then send it back to, in this case, lockup, but that works for any other tool that supports the topic standard. So let's look at this. As I said, I have a small demo website here that basically has exactly one content, namely one blog article about our wonderful implementation of topic in what I am showing here. So let's look into the back end of WordPress. For those of you who know WordPress, you will see that, okay, we have exactly one blog article in here, and you see it has not been translated yet. So the plus means add translation, so it's not translated yet. We're gonna do a pull thing here. So I'm gonna actually set up a pull job inside lockup. So this is not WordPress now. This is an external system, Xilio's lockup. And we're gonna say, okay, I want to translate from German into English. Okay, so easy so far. And now I'm actually going to connect through a plugin directly to my connectivity demo website. I'm going to go into the posts folder, and here I see, okay, there's a blog article, and now I will manually select this, but of course this can be automated. So I'm going to manually say, I want to translate this into English, and then Xilio pulls the content from WordPress, creates this task, and I can now, in accordance to the topic protocol, I can now make this available for localization. So this is just a status change. So now that means a client can now log into lockup and get that project and translate it. And that's exactly what we're going to do now from Studio. Yeah, there are some settings here. So of course I need to let Studio know where do I find my lockup host. I can test. We can see that we can also import world server and other projects. But now I'm going to log into lockup. I'm going to find this blog article. I'm going to choose my project template for Studio and where I'm going to store it, and some other Studio relevant information like the due date and other stuff. And then when I click on finish, it actually creates a project directly in Studio. So we can already see it in the background here. It has created this blog project. And again, of course, this is now a completely normal project. I have pre-translated it already, so we don't spend too much time in the demo. Just going to do a slight change here. So you see that not everything has been prepared and pre-arranged. So I'm going to change one word. We really published this reference implementation, and now I'm going to send this project back. I'm going to finalize it first. Being a good project manager, I know I need to update my TM and generate my translations, etc. And then I can go back into my plugin and I can return this job to lockup and also complete it there, or set the status to completed, because that means that lockup will then automatically pass on that information to WordPress. Or as a matter of fact, I didn't set it up completely automatically. Or did I? No, I think I didn't. No, I still have to publish it to the source, to WordPress, but I could also trigger that automatically by setting the status when I upload the file. And then here, if we now refresh, you will see, okay, the English translation has now been added. And this again now is completely normal WordPress functionality. So WordPress has received my translation. You can see including the word really. So this is now here, and now I can show it in a preview or publish it. And then I'm just back into the normal WordPress functionality at this point in time. So this was an example of an integration basically of a pull connector from WordPress to lockup, and then another pull connector where Studio as a client to the lockup host basically pulls the content and translates it. Another example with a different system, and again using Xilio connector, a push interface. So within Adobe Experience Manager, what you will see is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to select some content in here with the Xilio plugin for AEM, and I'm going to push it out into localization. And the way, or what happens behind the scenes, it's going to be a little bit fast in the demo. So of course, automated processes are always fast. So I'm going to explain it beforehand a little bit. So what's going to happen is the Xilio plugin will push this content to lockup again. Of course, everything that is in Xilio always runs through the unified API, which is the big advantage of lockup. I'll come back to that a little bit later. And then lockup will automatically forward that to the localization process, which in this case, again, is going to be connecting content. So connecting content also using the topic protocol will receive that project and we'll automatically create that project in group share in this case, in this demo. And then the translators can download it from group share, review it, whatever they need to do in group share, and when they're done with the project, then of course we will deliver it back to lockup, and lockup will deliver it back to AEM. I'm actually not even going to show that part in the demo because it looks exactly like what we just saw in WordPress. So let's look at this here in Adobe Experience Manager. So I'm going to select this little About Us content here, and I'm going to say I want to create a translation project. And of course, since Xilio is a Dutch company, we're going to do them the favor of doing this in Dutch. I'm going to give a great project title here called New. And then it created these jobs in AEM with the plugin. And here I can now say start the jobs, which will effectively push it to lockup, and from there onwards to connecting content. In connecting content, you already know the interface now. We have a topic connector. So here what we can do is we can set up, okay, where's my topic connection, where's my topic host. So here we have our lockup interface again. And then we have something very similar to what you also saw. So we go through the tasks, creating the project, analyzing it, pre-translating it, project TMs in this case, and again we're going to upload it to the group share server, and we're automatically going to assign it. In this case, we're going to use the assignments as we have them in the project template. So optionally, you can store these assignments in connecting content or in the studio template. And then I run this service for the demo in the console mode so that we can see. So you can see lockup is now posting the topic jobs. It calls the studio API here. Let's move that out of the way. And then the topic is actually over already, and now it's connecting content, running all these jobs, uploading it to the group share server, and you can see all the way down there it says I'm finished. And if I look in here, then I have this topic task. Topic always calls it a task, so that's why it's called task here, and the project name is new. And as a translator, I can now log in through Studio to my group share server, download this project, and work on it just with any other normal group share project. So I'm not sure how long this demo video still runs, but from here it's actually a normal group share project. Talking a little bit about workflows, a few things I would like to mention here is one I think very important aspect to keep in mind. So normally what happens is you have a CMS where your content is hosted and resided and is being managed. From there, the content gets pulled or pushed and automated into the translation process, which happens in your translation management system. In our side of the universe, always some SDL system, of course, but it could of course be something else. Then it gets typically reviewed in the translation management system, and then it gets imported back in the CMS. And typically what you then do is you do a final check. So people check, does this really all make sense in the context, and now that we really render it, and if it does, then we simply approve it, and it gets published in the CMS. And what's very important is if it's not okay, then please install a process where you then revert to the TMS status of your project and do your fixes there, because otherwise, of course, oops, I expected an animation here, but it's not there. Because if you don't do that, of course, your translation memory becomes out of sync. So it's really important to take the step back, go back into the review or whatever other project phase in the TMS, implement the change there, and re-import it into the CMS. Try not to have the content management system get out of sync with your translation system, because otherwise you'll have a problem the next time around when your translation memory wasn't updated. In order to facilitate this a little bit and try to make sure that only very few changes actually happen here at all, maybe no changes at all, ideally, of course. What's really important in these contexts is always the visual context. So we need translators and reviewers in the TMS system to have some sort of a visual context, because if you can see this, for instance, this button here, you need to understand this is a button, or you might need to understand that these are all headers, and that you're not supposed to use the extended version of CMS and put content management systems there, because it will destroy the layout. So it's very important to have some sort of a preview for translators and reviewers. And there are several ways you can actually do that. So there's the possibility to have a live preview. Trados, World Server, Group Share, etc. They all enable that, and that can be good enough, but it will never be one-to-one. So we cannot do a live preview where we basically render an XML content with some style sheet. We will never be able to produce exactly this because we simply don't have access to all the resources that we need to do that. For example, we typically don't have the images even, and even if you do, you can never render it exactly like the content management system would render it. Another thing you can do is you can just include a static rendered preview. So of course, when you export a job from, let's say, WordPress or AEM, you can send along an HTML file that looks or shows what this content exactly looks like if it gets rendered by the content management system, or a PDF file maybe. So most CMSs can do that. Tapik can also do that. Lookup can also automate that. So we can send that along. Ideally, however, what we do is we will get access to a staging server. So typically large companies have a staging server where there is the, let's say, preview version of the website before it gets published, or maybe it's the same thing that's already published, but it's not the live version. It's an internal testing server. And it is ideal if the localization phase can actually have access to that, because then what we can also implement on our end in the localization review and translation tools, we can, of course, enable you to actually see what you are translating on that staging server. So going back to the workflow, then you don't find out here that, oh, I completely misunderstood the layout here, because you can actually see it on the staging server as you are translating. And of course, it's a lot easier to implement changes than in the TMS. So a few things that I would like to add here. Don't forget about that. Don't forget about this, making sure all the changes are in the TMS as well. And focus on trying to get some visual context, simply because these are two things that are typically forgotten or not given enough consideration in these kinds of projects. Lastly, of course, the question is, yes, you can do all these things with APIs and automation is great, but the problem there is if we start automating different systems, so for example, we say, well, we want this CMS to talk with that cut tool, and then tomorrow we want to talk it with this business management tool, and then maybe with this web CMS, and then with that machine translation tool, and maybe between the cut tools even exchange data. At the end of the day, we will have what I like to call the Babylonian API confusions. We're just going to have millions of individual APIs. And of course, the problem is, what if something changes? So this gets very expensive. At the end of the day, we have unnecessary differences. Every API will be implemented differently. So the poor localization engineer has to understand hundreds of APIs at the end of the day. We're constantly reinventing the wheel, because if, I don't know, these people talk to these people, they might implement differently and not use all the things that these people already learned when they implemented that interface. So we're constantly reinventing the wheel here. And it's just at the end of the day a waste of money for all three parties, really, for customers, for LSPs, and for the software vendors. So we think this problem of how do we get information from A to B is really a big barrier if we want to achieve true global content. So there have been initiatives to solve this. There is a German-speaking initiative. It was brought into life by DEACOM, the Verband Deutsche Redaktions- und Content Management Systemhersteller. So essentially, it's an association of German content management and component-based content management systems, probably the association with the longest name in the whole world. And they have come up with what they call Kodi, which is the common translation interface. And they did that in 3 levels. So level 1, and as an example in the demo later on, we'll also see an implementation of the content management system schema with SDL Trados Studio as an example for a cut tool. Of course, those are the systems that we know at Kaleidoscope. So Kodi Level 1, really what it defines is it defines a package format. So it's essentially a zip file that has a Kodi extension that includes a predefined structure. There's an XML file in there that carries all the business metadata, meaning what files are to be translated, what's the name of the project, what's the deadline, etc. You can send that package over to your translation provider via email, FTP, or whatever. And then on the other hand, in the cut tool, for example, we have a free plugin that you can just download from the App Store that can just open a Kodi package, translate it, store it back as a Kodi package, and return it to the content management system. And everything the translator needs will be inside that package, and the content management system understands the package when it gets sent back. So that's very simple. I'm not even going to demo that. Kodi Level 2 is essentially the same thing. So we have the same package format. We have a .kodi file, which really is a zip file with this predefined structure. But we're going to add a level of automation here, which is the hot folder or watched folder integration. So that means in the demo, schema will put the Kodi file into that watched folder, connecting content on the Trados or on our side. You've already seen that, the way connecting content monitors a watched folder. So it will say, oh, there's a Kodi file here, how great. Automatically create a project. In the demo, I think it's going to be in Studio or Group Share, not sure anymore. Translate it, and once it's translated, it puts it back into the watched folder. And then from there, the content management system automatically, because it's also watching the folder, it automatically pulls the translation back in, and voila, you can publish your target language document. And then there's Kodi Level 3, which essentially works without this exchange folder. So it's an API-based thing. So essentially, Schema SD4 talks to the connecting content host, and connecting content, as you have already seen, in turn talks to a Group Share, Studio, World Server, etc. So Schema SD4 publishes a project via the API. Connecting content receives that, parses it, knows the deadline, can extract additional information like what cost center is it, what workflow was selected, etc. Publishes it to the localization side, monitors it there. And what Schema can do through the Level 3 integration is Schema can also ask connecting content, how are we doing on this project? And connecting content will send a status back and say, okay, we're 43% done. Or Schema SD4, for example, can cancel the project. So then we don't want this translated anymore. Or it can update the project saying, here's a new version of this file. And then it's connecting content's task as an automation system to do something about that in whatever system you automate. So in World Server, for example, we can simply cancel a project. We can update the project in Group Share. It's a little bit more complicated, so we need to inform people to please check in their project, and then we can cancel and update it. But basically that then is the task of the automation platform to figure out what it now does with this particular call. And again, I'm going to show an example for that with SD4 connecting content, SDL Trados Studio using the Kodi package. So let's start out in the CMS. This is SD4. I have ported the infamous photo printer document to SD4. So this is what it would look like in a content management system, for example. In Schema, we have what is called the translation report. So we can ask Schema, okay, what is the translation status for, let's say, German? And then it will look into each of the fragments and tell me, for example, in this case, oops, none of this has been translated yet. So it needs to go into translation first. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to send that document, or this tree, essentially, we're going to send that into translation. And this is all Schema 3 or Schema specific, and I'm actually going to show Kodi Level 3 immediately. So in Kodi Level 3, we can assign these normal Kodi standardized metadata, or we can add new metadata like cost center, workflow selector, etc. And then in Schema, I'm just going to say export, and now Schema will run the translation export, and similar as to what you saw before, I'm running this only in the console now. There will be a Kodi call. So here Schema is logging into connecting content. It creates a project. This XML configuration error is normal, comes from .NET. And now it's running all the tasks. So it's converting, it's pre-translating, it's analyzing, and then it's in my demo simply opens it up again in Studio, in a rather old version of Studio, by the way. The project was created by my colleague, and you can see here the description landed in Studio, the target date landed in Studio, the deadline, etc. And again, it's just a normal Studio project. but it's 67% pre-translated already. And the nice thing about Kodi Level 3 is we can now query this, or the technical author, without even having any idea of what's happening on the translation side. They can query it, and they will see, okay, Klaus Fleischmann has already translated 67% of this document. I also see it in my translation report that this translation is currently being done, and it's done by Klaus Fleischmann on the cut tool side. So let's go in here and translate a little bit more. Come on. There we go. I'm opening the project. There we go. And I'm just going to translate a little bit here. Blah, blah, blah. Very fast. I'm a quick translator. And now I'm 89% done. And again, I can update this status in SD4. And I'll see here, okay, it's now 89% done. And yeah, the status, of course, is that the project has been started. So let's finish it quickly. Fast forward and blah, 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 blah. Okay, chunk, chunk, chunk. And now we're done. And what I'll do here now is I will complete the project, or mark it as complete here. And that will trigger connecting content to pass the project back to SD4. So we see again, okay, we told SD4 the project is done, please come pick it up. And in SD4, automatically the status changes to finished. And if we update the translation report, then we'll see everything's fine. We can now publish this file in SD4, which then at the end of the day, that's the last step I do, just to show you what this looks like. And I can change the content language in SD4 to German, and you will see, okay, I now have all my German translations available here in SD4. So that was Kodi Level 3, what I wanted to show you. And oops, go on. Kodi has been established by, I think, pretty much all of the German content management systems, and also a lot of cut tools, for example, connecting content, taking care of all the SDL cut tools, level 1, 2, and 3. There are some disadvantages of Kodi. Of course, Kodi was built by the content management side and not by the localization side. So we do lack a few critical process relevant business metadata. We only have like the name, the deadline, a subject matter, and the comment, but we don't really have a lot of information about what kind of content is that, what workflow do we use, what's the cost center, etc. So there is just a little bit of information missing that we need in localization normally. The biggest disadvantage is that the translatable content itself is actually not standardized. So you can send whatever XML structure you want to as the payload, as it's called, as the translatable content. What they did standardize is the way, or the directory structure in the zip file where I can find it, and they did standardize the XML control file that basically contains the name and all of that. So that really is standardized, but the content itself is not standardized. Also, there is no real chaining, so I cannot chain 3 Kodi hosts behind each other, which unfortunately is sometimes necessary in the localization supply chain. So you might have a customer that sends it to an MLV, that sends it on to a regional language provider, that sends it on to 3 target country language provider, that send it on to the freelancers. So that really isn't supported. So this is something that you have to figure out with your normal TMS systems, but you cannot chain several Kodi hosts behind each other. And maybe this is more a development problem. It's using the SOAP interface, which is a rather, not a very modern interface. It's not what you want to use nowadays if you develop a new web service. So there was a second initiative, or there is a second initiative that was triggered by Gala in cooperation with a few other partners. And it's the TAPIC initiative, Translation API Cases and Classes. And as the name says, what TAPIC actually wants to do is, of course, we want to have a common integration model. So basically a data model as to how do we pass business metadata and how do we pass translatable content from a CMS to a TMS and then down the entire supply chain from even one cut tool to the other if you work with different cut tools along the supply chain. We want to have a universal translation API. So basically one TAPIC host can talk to another TAPIC host, or one TAPIC host can talk to several TAPIC clients, etc. So we can connect. Are you TAPIC compliant? Yes. Then I can connect to it and get my content. But we also want to list best practices. So this is for, let's say, industry outsiders that want to figure out, how do I send something into localization? What do I need to watch out for? How is that best done? Then we want to have documented best practices. This is how you do it. Use our recommendations, because we as an industry have agreed on that. And we also want to give use cases, particularly again to externals that want to connect to our systems, so that whatever content you have or whatever tool you have that wants to trigger some translation, it always uses this standardized method, this standardized data model, and standardized APIs and best practices, etc. And then it can automatically talk to each other system that supports Topic. That's the idea. We have a lot of partners in there, which is actually quite unique. So pretty much all of the important standardization and other opinion leaders in our industry are aware of, are following, or even actively supporting Topic, including Diacom, for example, who are willing to implement whatever recommendations we will eventually come up with. It's a community-driven project, so it's run by volunteers on a collaborative basis. Whoever wants to participates. It's open source. Yeah, so if you can just use the APIs and implement them, and don't worry about being sued if you use something proprietary, because by definition it's open source. It's pre-standardization, so we just want to come to agreements and define these things, but we don't want to actually produce a standard. It's more like a reference library than a standard, although we do have on the radar to eventually maybe pass our agreement and our recommendations, our use cases, etc., onto Oasis to maybe have them standardized as well. But standards tend to move slowly, and this is a very dynamic world, so we like to base this on this community-driven collaborative platform. A sample implementation of this you have actually already seen. So what I showed you, the WordPress and actually also the AEM examples that I had, they were both built on Topic. So Xilio has implemented a Topic host. So of course, what Xilio does here towards WordPress, that is proprietary. That is something that Xilio knows how to do, or AEM or Sitecore or whatever else Xilio supports. But on the localization side, it is Topic. So Xilio is a Topic host. So what we saw when the WordPress example was that Studio acted as what we call a Topic client. So it logged into the host, it pulled the project, translated it. When it was done, it pushed it back. And then again, what Xilio did with WordPress, that's their problem or their API knowledge. But again, exposed to the localization side, it's based on the standard Topic protocol. Or what we saw in the other example, in the AEM example, it's missing this logo here in the slide, but that was the AEM example, where basically Xilio got the content here from the plugin, pushed it on automatically to the connecting content Topic host, and then connecting content automatically pushed it on to, I think it was group share in that case. Yeah, it was group share. And in the demo, we didn't see the way back simply because it would have been very boring. You don't really see anything in automation. That's always the problem to run these demos. But essentially, the content would have flown back from the Trados world via connecting contents to lockup, and lockup would have pushed it back to AEM, just as we saw with WordPress. So this is always very invisible in demos, unfortunately. So this is the ingenuity of the Topic protocol, or as Xilio puts it, and I borrowed this slide from one of their slide decks. So basically what Xilio is doing is it supports all these content management systems on the back-end side, but it exposes it to the localization world using Topic. So basically it's a uniform API. Lockup has a uniform API both on this side. Yeah, so they uniform all these individual APIs on their side, and they also expose it as a uniform API based on Topic on the localization side. So any, let's say, service provider, any tool, etc., that supports Topic can log into lockup and then automatically pull content from all these source systems. So for example, what we do is, of course, with connecting content, we connect to that. You saw that in the demo. We have our plugin which connects to that. And of course, for example, our language services division, Eurocom, they just also simply connect to that Topic API and then automatically support everybody who runs any of these systems. So that really demonstrates the vision of Topic. You just have to support Topic, or if you're a content provider, you just have to support Topic, and then you will be able to basically dock any localization tool that knows how to do topic, you can expose it to them and they can pull the content. And that really is a very cool vision to overcoming this Babylonian confusion of APIs, I think. So to sum it up, you saw the challenges, speed, project numbers, and the need to bring down transaction costs and speed up the processes. I talked a little bit theoretically about some solutions and showed you a few solutions. So we saw connecting content with the watched folder integration, with the WordPress connector, with the AEM connector, with Kodi Level 3 integration. So all of that was based on connecting content on our end, or also on the Studio plugin when we want to do a more manual process. And I went a little bit into detail about why standards are good and what the vision is. If topic ever is widely adopted, which we're strongly working on, of course, then this will really be a paradigm changer in our industry when it comes to automating the localization supply chain. So with that, I'm at the end of the webinar. I thank you very much for your interest. I'm gonna stop the recording now, and then if there are any questions, we can go in and answer those questions. If you're watching this as a recording, feel free to reach out to us via email or check out our website or however else you want to reach out to us. Thank you very much and talk to you soon.